Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is JaMycal Hasty, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 13 waiver wire targets for the 2022 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, we're going to be primarily focusing on waiver wire prospects at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, kicker, and defensive positions. Now, in some of your circumstances, you need waiver wire prospects this week because you're dealing with bye weeks. The Arizona Cardinals and the Carolina Panthers are both out on bye, so you will not have the services of a Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, James Conner, D'Onta Foreman, Marquise Hollywood-Brown, impact players that can absolutely help win you a week. And for those of us who are still trying to make the fantasy playoffs, not having their services is going to be tough. So this week, you'll have to go ahead and travel to your waiver wire and hit up some of the potential players that we're going to mention on today's episode. Over the course of today's episode, we're going to be mentioning players that are typically rostered in less than 45% of Yahoo leagues at this current moment in time, with a greater range of availability. Hopefully, these players are available in your league to pick them up and make impact plays going into Week 13. And potentially, if their momentum continues, they could be valuable prospects for the remainder of the 2022 season in order to help you capture a 2022 fantasy football championship. Now, besides bye weeks, other factors that could end up making a huge difference are injuries. Just in Week 12 alone, the amount of injuries are ridiculous. Guys like Darnell Mooney, Elijah Mitchell, Michael Carter, Allen Robinson, Aaron Rodgers, Jacoby Myers, Travis Etienne, Jeff Wilson, Deebo Samuel, and Damian Harris. Even Christian McCaffrey was having his knee looked at on the sideline in that game against the New Orleans Saints yesterday. There is a lot of potential for injuries that will enhance the value of other players because they're given more opportunity, just like the one that is currently on screen, Zonovan Knight. Now, before we get into talking about this running back, I want to remind you guys, for those of you who are new to the channel and you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. So whether that's with our trade targets, whether that's with weekly rankings, whether that's with weekend live stream, Sunday morning, in order to help you set your lineups, the entire purpose is in order to help you win on a weekly basis. So be sure to go ahead, do yourself a favor, take 2 seconds out of your day and subscribe. Thank you very much. Also, before we begin, at the end of today's episode, I will be mentioning a couple PrizePicks entries for tonight's Monday Night Football game between the Indianapolis Colts and Pittsburgh Steelers. So for those of you who are interested, you can go ahead and you can travel to the description of the video and go ahead and check out timestamps, or wait until after the waiver wire section, as I mentioned all these players, and go ahead and check out a couple of those entries. Paris Campbell looks like a pretty good number in terms of going more on his overall receiving yards tonight. So we'll go ahead and we'll talk about that in terms of a couple entries that I'm making going into tonight's game. If you guys haven't checked out PrizePicks, again, there's a link down in the description. When you go ahead, travel to their website and use promo code Andrew to sign up and make a first-time deposit. Your first-time deposit is immediately doubled. So go ahead, take advantage of the opportunity. Go ahead, make a deposit. Play some daily fantasy at your fingertips, whether it's the NBA and the NFL and much more. Check that out. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about some Week 13 waiver wire targets, beginning with the running back position, because we know that you can never have too much depth at running back, but we also know that the running back position is certainly one that always has to deal with injuries. Now, we saw that Michael Carter go down with an ankle sprain. That obviously is going to be something we're going to need to monitor for the entirety of the week. We are unsure of what the severity looks like as of now until they go ahead and make that public information. But if in fact we're going to see Michael Carter miss time, and the fact that James Robinson yesterday morning was a healthy scratch, which means that he was not active even though he was healthy, leads me to believe that the New York Jets coaching staff believe that Ty Johnson and Zonovan Knight are more trustworthy to them going forward. So Zonovan Knight, as soon as Michael Carter went down, came in, 14 rushing attempts for 69 rushing yards, 3 targets, 3 catches, 34 receiving yards, and 11.8 fantasy points. Now, you may be wondering, Andrew, what about Ty Johnson? Well, we have to talk about Ty Johnson. He certainly could be in this conversation of being one of the primary options in this backfield. If in fact we're not going to see Michael Carter active, of course, we saw Breece Hall many weeks ago, season-ending injury. James Robinson may not have pulled enough favor within this coaching staff. Perhaps his Achilles is slowing him down later in the season. But either way, we have a 1-2 combo here that for the remainder of the season could have a lot of value. You guys have seen the rest of season strength of schedule for the Jets. In the fantasy playoff, they have a very manageable schedule that is quite advantageous for the running back position. So going into this conversation, I 100% believe that Ty Johnson, yes, could be of value, but primarily we want Zonovan Knight going forward as the primary back to fill in for Michael Carter. All right, move on to our number 2. We have JaMycal Hasty. JaMycal Hasty has been pretty much the handcuff to Travis Etienne ever since we saw James Robinson be traded to the New York Jets. But yesterday, during the game, Travis Etienne left with an injury. And as soon as he stepped away to the locker room, JaMycal Hasty went off. Found himself a lot of receiving work, 5 catches, 67 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for a total of 18 fantasy points on the day. He wasn't incredibly effective on the ground, 12 attempts for 28 yards, but we weren't expecting running backs for this team to be quite effective against the Baltimore Ravens for the entirety of that day. I mean, the Baltimore Ravens are one of the best run-stopping defenses in the league, so it was pretty normal to see that entire outcome. That being said, Travis Etienne was pulled from the game, yet he was cleared to return, but the coaching staff made it a point that they didn't want to risk him, potentially re-injuring himself or potentially making it worse. Now, there may be a scenario in which that injury, like the way that Travis Etienne said after the game, isn't going to bother him. He should be ready to go in week 13. And if that's going to be the case, then JaMycal Hasty is nothing more than a handcuff. And it pretty much goes for Darrell Henderson as well, who is currently a handcuff in that situation, who has recently been picked up by the Jacksonville Jaguars after he was released by the LA Rams. But if we're in a situation where we need to trust in one of these running backs, Darrell Henderson is still already rostered in 47% of leagues. I would assume that he could probably end up winning the job if Travis Etienne is going to be moving on and potentially missing time in the next couple weeks here. But at this current moment, I think JaMycal Hasty's probably next man up for this upcoming week going up against Detroit, assuming Travis Etienne misses any time at all. I doubt that's going to be the case based on everything we've heard. But again, you always want to have your handcuffs on roster. This is a conversation about handcuffs, and going into the remainder of the season, you want to make sure you protect your investments just in case injuries occur. And JaMycal Hasty is exactly that, and Darrell Henderson in the case of Travis Etienne. Moving on to Kyren Williams, our number 3. So here's the thing about Kyren Williams. He is going to benefit from game scripts. He had 11 rushing attempts for 35 yards, 3 catches on 3 targets for 25 yards, 7.5 half PPR fantasy points. Not the greatest overall week we could have potentially seen, but ultimately a decent performance in the case of a running back that may end up being at the very end of your bench. At this current moment, with a backup quarterback without Cooper Kupp out there and an offense that just does not look like it's NFL, talent across the board, it seems to me like Kyren Williams will continue to get more and more opportunity as the weeks progress, as they kind of want to give him a look. At this moment, of course, if we get Matthew Stafford back and we get, Cooper Kupp back in week 16, 17, 18 in that sort of capacity, sure, there may be a conversation to be had in regards to the potential value of Cam Akers over Kyren Williams. But until then, with all the negative game scripts, Kyren Williams seems to be the guy taking majority of the role in this backfield. Moving on to Jordan Mason. Like I was mentioning before, we did see Elijah Mitchell go down with a knee injury. It's an MCL sprain. To the severity, we're not 100% certain. But Jordan Mason stepped up, played a little bit, 5 rushing attempts for 25 rushing yards. This is 2 consecutive weeks in which he's contributed to this backfield, in comparison to a guy like Tyrion Davis-Price, who we want to mention, of course, to some sort of extent, because again, he is a rookie running back. He was drafted to be an immediate impact within this offense, potentially. But with Christian McCaffrey coming in, there's been a complete shift to this backfield. That all being mentioned, if in fact Christian McCaffrey is going to miss time and Elijah Mitchell is going to miss time, both these running backs could be of great value as to who is going to be the primary guy. We have seen Jordan Mason in the last 2 weeks have those opportunities, be active. And on the other end of the spectrum, Tyrion Davis-Price hasn't. But that being said, Kyle Shanahan has done this in the past where he'll play one running back in a given week and the next week he's completely switched it out for another. We're going to go ahead. We're going to monitor this. Hopefully everyone's healthy and ready to play, specifically Christian McCaffrey. But if in fact we have to pivot, Tyrion Davis-Price and of course Jordan Mason available for us in 99% of Yahoo formats. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about wide receivers. Let's begin with Zay Jones. In the last 2 games that he has played, he is combined for 24 total targets. The volume of opportunity he is being granted is unbelievable. And as long as teams continue to focus on covering Christian Kirk and this offense continues to get themselves into bad game scripts in which they have to dig themselves out of holes in order to compete on a weekly basis, Zay Jones will continue to have value within this offense. And in a full PPR scoring format, based on the fact that he had, 11 receptions on Sunday, a fantastic option going forward. Moving on to Isaiah McKenzie. Considering the offense that he is associated with, of course, Josh Allen, the Bills, they're going to be a high-scoring offense for the remainder of the season. And the fact that he had 10 targets, lead to 6 catches, 96 yards, and a touchdown against the Detroit Lions isn't much of a surprise. But when you take into account the fact that we're expecting Gabriel Davis, Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox to be the primary 1, 2, 3 receiving options, a couple sprinkles of Isaiah McKenzie here and there has shown up this season, but they haven't been consistent. Hopefully they'll be consistent going forward. But at this current moment in time, currently rostered in 33% of leagues, he's mainly a guy you want to play in a better matchup against a defense that really isn't going to stop their slot cornerback. Moving on, let's talk about Elijah Moore. This may be the first time we're actually talking about Elijah Moore in quite some time, mainly because we've seen a shift in the offense with Mike White taking the starting role for the New York Jets. he has given life to receiving and running options within the Jets offense that we did not witness when Zach Wilson was under center. So going forward, if in fact we're going to continue to see Mike White unlock the potential of this offense, besides Garrett Wilson, who obviously had an incredible game, Elijah Moore ended up finding himself in the end zone. And if he continue to go ahead and go back to him on a weekly basis with ample amount of targets, he could be a fantastic option. Moving on, we're talking about DeVante Parker. DeVante Parker earlier this year with Mac Jones was actually a great option. Unfortunately, Mac Jones got injured and so did DeVante Parker, and they both pretty much disappeared. Now that we're both healthy and they're both in a far more vertical offense for the New England Patriots in comparison to what we saw earlier this season, in which they weren't throwing the ball deep in any sort of capacity and wanted to run the ball for predominantly the entire game, we're probably in a situation here where, of course, the New England Patriots have realized they have to throw the ball in order to win, especially against teams like Minnesota and now this week against Buffalo on Thursday night. I expect to see, yes, Tre'Davious White out there, but DeVante Parker could find himself another big week here for fantasy purposes. Moving on. Let's talk about Mack Hollins. Mack Hollins is the number 2. With Darren Waller and, of course, Hunter Renfrow both on IR still, of course, the next best option as a receiving target outside of, Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams, perhaps a little bit of a sprinkle of Foster Moreau down in the red zone, is going to continue to be Mack Hollins. Currently only rostered in 21% of leagues. They take on the Los Angeles Chargers, and I know it's extremely difficult in terms of a matchup. That being said, we do believe the fact that the momentum is building in his direction. 2 consecutive weeks of over 50 receiving yards could potentially continue on for the remainder of the season. We've seen Mack Hollins be an ample option within this offense, even with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow both active. It does not matter. As long as this offense continues to play as well as they have over the course of the last couple weeks, Mack Hollins is a pretty good option. Going on, we have Nelson Agholor as the final wide receiver I wanted to mention. Nelson Agholor does this every single year. He'll have one explosive game for a touchdown, just like this last week, 6 catches, 65 yards and a touchdown, 15.5 fantasy points. And the reason why he's only rostered in 1% of leagues is because he shows up, he has his performance, then disappears. I'm hoping it's not going to be the case. The fact that the Buffalo Bills are giving up, the 3rd most points to opposing wide receivers over the course of the last 6 weeks is a ridiculous number. We'll talk about that more in detail when we get to Wednesday's wide receiver rankings. But at this current moment in time, we could end up seeing Mac Jones really elevate this offense as a passing attack and obviously give a lot of fantasy value to not only DeVante Parker, but to Nelson Agholor going forward. Let's move on. Let's talk about some tight ends. Of course, we mentioned Foster Moreau a little bit earlier. The fact that he's still only rostered in 39% of leagues is ridiculous to me. He's a fantastic option. They take on the Chargers. He has scored 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games. And as long as he continues to see ample opportunity, specifically down in the red zone, Foster Moreau, a fantastic option. Moving on to Tyler Conklin. The reason why I wanted to mention Tyler Conklin has to do with Mike White, of course, stepping in and obviously elevating this offense going forward, but the matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings. As Tyler Conklin is currently only rostered in 18% of leagues, they take on Minnesota, who gave up 3 catches, 63 and a touchdown to Hunter Henry, gave up 4 catches for 57 to Dawson Knox, 4 catches for 34 and a touchdown to Zach Ertz, 6 catches for 69 and 2 touchdowns to Mike Gesicki. A lot of potential there within the given matchup. Speaking of matchups, let's talk about Noah Fant going up against the LA Rams. Currently only rostered in 12% of leagues, Noah Fant goes up against the defense that over the course of the last month has been slaughtered by tight ends. Kelsey, 4 catches, 57 and a touchdown. Juwan Johnson, 3 catches, 47 and a touchdown. Cade Otton, 5 catches, 68 and a touchdown. And George Kittle, 3 for 39 and a touchdown. Consecutively, they have been getting destroyed by opposing tight ends. Why not Noah Fant within an offense that obviously wants to get him more and more involved on a weekly basis? Let's move on and talk about some quarterbacks. Beginning with our 1, 2, 3. If in fact these players are still available in your league somehow, some way, congratulations. You have fantastic options to go ahead and fill in for Kyler Murray going into this week. I know Deshaun Watson is rostered in 58% of Yahoo leagues, but if somehow, some way people have ignored him and you have ignored him in your league and you are in need of a quarterback, Deshaun Watson should be picked up. Jared Goff, 46% rostered. Marcus Mariota, 38%. Of course, Goff coming off of a week of 17.6 fantasy points against the Buffalo Bills of all defense. Imagine what he's going to do against the Jacksonville Jaguars with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Then we have Marcus Mariota taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's obviously an advantageous matchup. And once they get out of the weather concern of specifically last week against Washington, now we're in a situation against Pittsburgh where Marcus Mariota will be able to throw the ball in a far more comfortable position, and the running game won't be as negated in comparison to when they played against Washington. Let's move on to another 3 quarterbacks I wanted to mention, because, for example, if those prior 3 quarterbacks are all gone, you'll then have to pivot to the following. Kenny Pickett taking on the Atlanta Falcons, one of the best matchups at the wide receiver position that we can mention to date, currently only rostered in 11% of leagues. We haven't seen his performance from later tonight, but if in fact he puts together something decent, we could get a little bit more momentum going into this upcoming weekend's game in Week 13 against the Falcons. Then we have Mike White taking on Minnesota. They're giving up the second most points to opposing wide receivers thus far this season over the course of the last 5 weeks. Mike White obviously looks fantastic with 300 plus passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and a 78.6% passing completion percentage. Should be in a perfect position to succeed. Of course, Mac Jones just went off on them as well. Moving on to the final option, it is Jordan Love. If in fact Jordan Love is going to be the starting quarterback of this team and Aaron Rodgers is going to miss this week, currently only rostered in 1% of leagues, I wanted to mention Jordan Love mainly because they take on the Chicago Bears. We just saw Mike White dominate against that defense. If we're going to be in a situation where Jordan Love is given the opportunity and he looks anything similar to what he did last night against the Philadelphia Eagles secondary late in that game, Jordan Love could be a fantastic fantasy option going forward for us, not only in this week, but for potential future weeks going ahead. All right, let's go ahead and move on and talk about some kickers and defenses, throwing them all up on screen at the same time. So let's talk about kickers specifically. Matthew Wright plays tonight. He's had himself a pretty consistent stint with the Pittsburgh Steelers. We know, of course, that Chris Boswell, their primary kicker, is on the injured reserve, so Matthew Wright continues to get opportunity. And in an offense that, of course, has a rookie quarterback, they're a little bit more limited in terms of their red zone opportunities. They get down there and often have to settle for field goals. Not a big deal. Jason Sanders, they take on the San Francisco 49ers. It is the master versus the Padawan. Shanahan versus Mike McDaniel. I think we're going to be in a pretty interesting situation there. As of this current moment in time, the San Francisco 49ers have not allowed a single point in the second half in the last 4 consecutive games. I think that the Miami Dolphins are a good enough offense in comparison to that defense to be able to show up and show out. And if anything, score a lot of field goals in that game. The final option is Greg Zuerlein, of course, with Mike White establishing himself as a better offensive threat than Zach Wilson. This offense will score more, whether that's PATs or field goals. All of it is the same. It's just more points for Greg Zuerlein's overall weekly basis. Let's move on to some defenses. Talking about the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns this week, they take on Houston. Anybody who plays against Houston should be started as a defense. They're currently only rostered in 7% of leagues. I'm going to go ahead and pick them up in some of mine. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, they take on the LA Rams. If Matthew Stafford is once again going to miss this week because they're trying to hold him out and keep him healthy, that could be another option there. Currently only rostered in 18% of leagues. Seattle could be, an option that you might want to roll with considering other matchups going into the week. The final team I wanted to mention are the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers, they do take on Chicago. They have always played well against Chicago over the last couple of years. Sure, the Green Bay Packers cannot stop the run. And what the Chicago Bears do the best is running the football. But if in fact that Justin Fields is not going to be active, this could be a matchup where we want to go ahead and play it. If Justin Fields is active, we want to avoid it like the plague in all sorts of manners, because if in fact Justin Fields is ready to go, I'm very worried about that Green Bay Packers defense getting torched on, because just look at what exactly Jalen Hurts just did to them. He had himself over 150 rushing yards. I feel like Justin Fields could probably go for 300 if he's active this week, so we got to be careful with that. Okay, either way, just mentioning them as my number 3 in case Trevor Siemian somehow is the starting quarterback for that team going into this week. If not, Nathan Peterman, which could be an even better option. Okay, now with all that mentioned, we're going to go ahead and transition and talk about some potential prize picks, but that's going to cover it for my Week 13 waiver wire targets for the 2022 fantasy football season. If you like today's content, be sure to click the like button down below. Thank you very much. Let me know down in the comment section if there are any other questions you guys have. I'll be sure to try to get to those by today, if not tomorrow. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So with all that covered, let's go ahead and let's talk about some entries for tonight's Monday Night Football game via PrizePicks. All right, so as you can see to the right of me, we are here via PrizePicks for the Monday night slate of games. Of course, a lot of players' stats in regards to potentially even Thursday night and even going into Week 13. They've already got a lot of player statistics that you can go ahead and pick more or less on that given player statistic. Of course, we're going to focus mainly on tonight's game because I'm always looking for extra skin in the game in terms of, some of these matchups, even if I don't have a fantasy player going. So a couple of the numbers that I specifically found that I'm excited about. First and foremost is Michael Pittman going 5.5 receptions. At that current number, I'm going to go ahead and pick more. He's certainly been able to accomplish that as of late with Matt Ryan under center. And even in one singular circumstance with Sam Ehlinger under center, they know how much of a vital option he is within this offense. He's going to get himself over 5.5 receptions. Let's talk about receiving yards. In the case of Paris Campbell, in the last 4 consecutive games that he has played with Matt Ryan, he's been able to surpass this number. Obviously, these 2 down trots are the 2 games with Sam Ehlinger. Either way, I think he's very easily going to be able to accomplish this in my mind. This is an automatic more. Now, when we talk about making a potential entry into tonight's game, you have to include 2 different teams. I don't love any of the current numbers going into this week. I think the one, if I had to pick, would be going with someone like Pat Freiermuth. So when we go to Pat Freiermuth specifically, his number's at 44.5. I don't love that number, but if I was to pick one, it would probably be that. Now, if you're someone that knows more about, the NBA perhaps, and you can go ahead and put together, 2 of these overall picks, or just Paris Campbell with, one of these statistics, whether it is assists, rebound, blocks, you can go ahead and probably get yourself a pretty good play here. But again, as of this current moment in time, if I was to go ahead and put together a play, it would be with these 3: Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, and Pat Freiermuth, all going more on their given statistics. We're going to go ahead and make an entry on that. We're looking for all 3 to hit, but considering my luck as of late, we're going to go ahead and click the flex play. What it does is if I, in fact, get all 3 correct, I 2.25 times my money. If I get only 2 correct, I at least get my money back with a little bit extra. We're going to go ahead, place that entry. All right, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you guys are interested, again, check out PrizePicks. There's a link down in the description. Make an account. Use promo code Andrew when you sign up. And, of course, make that first-time deposit, because your first-time deposit is immediately doubled up to $100. You can go ahead, follow or fade. Go ahead and put together your own entries, whether it is for the NFL, even soccer. I mean, I'm pretty sure in the upcoming days, we're going to have ourselves a couple situations for a couple World Cup picks here. You can even play the first half of NFL games. I mean, there's esports even here, right? Holy moly, CSGO. Either way, check that out today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about our running back rankings for Week 13. I'll see you guys. Peace.